Hello, and welcome to the Community IT Innovators Technology Topics Podcast, where we discuss nonprofit technology, cybersecurity, tech project implementation, strategic planning, and nonprofit IT careers. Find us at communityit.com.
All right. So you ready?
Let's do it.
Welcome, everyone, to the Community IT Innovators Technology Topics Podcast. I am Carolyn Woodard, your host, and today I am happy to have our CEO, Johan Hammerstrom, with me. Johan, would you like to introduce yourself and tell us why we should listen to you about nonprofit IT budgeting?
Thank you, Carolyn. Yeah, happy to be here. My name is Johan Hammerstrom. I'm the CEO at Community IT, and IT budgeting is something that we've helped hundreds of nonprofit organizations with. It's an integral part of our service and something that we have a lot of experience with.
And you personally, this is something that you often are assisting our clients with.
Yes, I've been helping nonprofits put together IT budgets for decades now. So I've worked with a lot of organizations directly, and then also assisted our team with working on budgets for their clients.
And I imagine this is not something that all MSPs do.
I think that's probably right. I mean, there's a range of MSPs, managed services providers, and IT support providers, and many of them are mostly focused on the technology. And if they are, helping out with a budget, they're basically just providing a list of technology solutions to purchase and what those solutions cost. And from our perspective, budgeting is a more complicated and involved process that really involves and requires effective partnership, with the organization. And that's a central part of the service that we provide. And so I think there are some managed services providers that do provide assistance around budgeting in the same way that we do, but it's not universal among managed service providers.
And is that something that we have learned that we need to do because we only serve nonprofit clients?
Well, I think it comes out of our mission-driven approach. So our goal is to really help our customers succeed at their missions. That's why we do this work. We only work with nonprofit organizations, and we really believe strongly in the work that they're doing. And in order for them to be effective, we need to understand what their priorities are, how their mission is accomplished, and how IT fits into them accomplishing their mission. We aren't successful. We don't consider ourselves to be successful with our customers if we're not engaged at that level. And so we found early on that in order for technology to be effective at a nonprofit organization, it needs to be planned. It needs to be prioritized. Good decision making needs to happen around technology solutions. And the budget is an element of that process, but it's a pretty critical one.
And that seems like a good segue into how do we recommend that nonprofits should budget for IT? And I'll just say we have a couple of webinars about this, so we could spend an hour just talking about ways to incorporate IT budgeting into a budget process. But can you kind of condense that down and give us some tips that you would advise?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's helpful to preface it. As I mentioned earlier, I've worked with literally hundreds of nonprofits, helping them with their budget. And one of the first things I learned is that every organization has a different budgeting process. Some are very rigorous, some are pretty flexible, some happen well ahead of the start of the fiscal year, some happen at the last minute. One of our clients that I work with, one of the clients that I worked with early on, I put a lot of effort into a spreadsheet. I put an Excel spreadsheet together with all these different categories of where their IT spending needed to go, sort of organized and prioritized. And, spent a lot of time getting the spreadsheet looking really nice and submitted it to them. And then when the budget was approved, they showed me their version, and they had taken my entire spreadsheet, copied it, and pasted it into a single cell of their Excel spreadsheet. And at first I was like, what? No, all my hard work. And then I realized, yeah, IT is just a small part of their overall budget. And um, that was their process and their approach. And so it was a good lesson that the first step of working on an IT budget is to understand how the organization does its budgeting process, how it thinks about budgeting, how it thinks about prioritizing initiatives, so that you can frame the technology priorities in, business terms that make sense to the organization. And it's helpful to, as you're working on an IT budget, to just keep in mind that it's not a technical task, it's a technology plus business exercise. And keeping the business side of it in mind is really important in prioritizing and framing the technology initiatives and solutions that need to be budgeted for in the coming fiscal year.
Yeah, I think we often talk about people who manage, programs, projects, your lease, your other infrastructure, your operations, are very capable of managing IT, but sometimes there's just like that, insecurity, I guess, or just a feeling that you don't know enough. So I like that idea of approaching it as you would manage any other asset or strategic, budget that you had to think about. Especially if you have, a trusted partner who can help you with like, what is the IT and what is it going to do for you? But then after you have figured out like, well, what's your style and how do you do it early? Do you do it last minute? Are there some things that you have to include, or how do you think about what you include in an IT budget?
Yeah, I mean, one way to think about what to include and honestly, I think the best approach is to prioritize. So include everything. That's something I tell our team all the time is don't make the decision for the customer. Don't assume that they can't afford this particular solution. If we think it's important, let's make the recommendation. And it can always be cut out of the budget, but at least it's there and it's been identified as something that the organization needs. So it's always important to include everything in the first version of the IT budget, with the understanding that not everything uh, that the organization may not be able to afford everything, that's been included in the budget. But I sort of think of it in three different categories. There's the non-negotiable category, like you have to pay for these things to function as an organization. Some of the items that show up in the non-negotiable category are subscriptions. If you're a Microsoft 365 customer, you're going to have to pay that license or your email's not going to work, and that's unacceptable. So, I mean, those items are pretty self-explanatory. If you have an office, you got to pay for the internet connection. Um, the networking infrastructure, for the most part, needs to be current. And then cybersecurity is an area that I would consider non-negotiable. And I think maybe 5 years ago, it was more thought of as more discretionary, but now, given the prevalence of cybersecurity threats and the requirements that financial auditors and insurance companies are including, in the financial audit process and in insurance applications, things like next generation antivirus, security awareness training, and fully functioning backups. Those are really now in the non-negotiable category. So that's the first group. The second, I would say, are those items that can be delayed potentially if there's major financial constraints on the organization, if there are other priorities, if there's funding issues. So things like laptop replacements. We strongly recommend a 3 or 4 year laptop replacement cycle, depending on how much wear and tear an organization's laptops get, and it really does vary from organization to organization. Some of the groups that we work with, their staff are working from home, they never go anywhere, their laptop's sitting on the desk. That laptop could last for 4 or 5 years. Other organizations, their staff are organizers, they're out in the field, they're meeting with people on an ongoing basis, they're taking their laptops with them everywhere they go. Those laptops probably need to get replaced every 3, maybe 4 years. So that's a good example of there's no kind of one size fits all decision-making process. It gets to the business requirement. How are the laptops being used? What do their staff need them for? And that can help inform that decision-making process. Do we need to have a 3-year laptop replacement cycle? Can we extend it for another year or two? Um, I would not, I would caution heavily against going beyond 5 years because of just the wear and tear, just from operating computer hardware starts to break down. People start to have funny issues, and it creates a lot more problems. But anyways, that's one area. Redesigning your website could be another one where, and again, it depends on the business need. Like, what role does the website play for the organization? If you have an out-of-date website that looks a little long in the tooth, is that going to create problems? Is that going to undermine your standing with donors or funders or your constituents? Or is your website just an online brochure? And I mean, we're working with an organization right now that doesn't have a website, which is inconceivable, in 2025. But I mean, they've been around for many years, and it's on the list, to get a website, but they've survived without one. And that's another great example of everything comes down to a business decision.
Yeah. And the culture and the organization itself, like,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Another one, this is maybe a little bit more of a niche example, but I think it serves to illustrate the larger point, and that would be older servers. There are still organizations that maybe have a server or two in their office. Generally, those servers in this day and age are not really doing anything critical for the organization. Maybe they're hosting a lot of media files, photos and videos. And it's very expensive to replace a server. That's a good example of you don't want to just put a line item in your budget for $10,000, $15,000 to replace a server. You want to have a conversation. Do we need to replace the server? What's the business impact if the server goes down? What's the long-term plan for the function that server is playing? Do we have on our 5-year roadmap a plan to replace the server, move it to the cloud? Maybe it's hosting files for a program that's no longer being, pursued by the organization, and it could all just be retired. So it's a niche example, but it serves to illustrate the point that there are very few items on an IT budget that shouldn't be examined from a business perspective.
And then you said there's a third kind of category.
The third category are discretionary. Those are things where you could postpone them indefinitely. And one example might be upgrading a business system. If you have a database like a case management system or a program management system, that's serving the organization well, but maybe is an older system that needs to be upgraded. Those sorts of projects can be very expensive. And if the system is still meeting the needs of the organization, that's one where there's no business impact. There's no critical business impact from not upgrading the system. Now, there are long-term business impacts related to using antiquated systems that the organization really should have a long-term plan for addressing. But in situations where there's difficulty with funding, those are the kinds of IT investments that can be delayed if necessary. Relative to the other ones, like at the end of the day, if you don't pay your Microsoft subscription and don't have email, it doesn't matter how good your business system is, your line of business system is, like you're not functioning as an organization. And if your staff have 6 or 7 year old laptops, they're probably not getting much work done during the day because their laptops are unusable. So even in that case, having the latest and greatest business system isn't making a big difference. So it's not so much that it's not important and doesn't have the long-term strategic value for the organization in accomplishing its mission. It's more that you've got to address the fundamentals first before you can address the higher level strategic initiatives.
So I think you've actually already kind of covered my next question, which was in this challenging environment, I think, well, I'll say nonprofits are always concerned about their budget.
Hmm.
I don't
Yeah.
think there's ever a time when any nonprofit is like, we've got plenty of funding and woohoo. So it's always a challenge, but it seems like this year has presented some new and intriguing challenges that nonprofits may not have faced before. We've had lots of stories and clients where their work was never political before. And then
Hmm.
all of a sudden, they're getting a lot more scrutiny for things that, they hadn't had scrutiny before. Maybe they have donors who are getting shy, or they had federal money or state money that they're no longer going to be able to get. So if your budget is contracting, I think you talked a little bit about like where can you I don't want to say maybe cut or put off
Hmm.
until later, but can you just kind of go over that again? It sounded like you were saying there's some immediate things that you have to pay for every year, like email.
Yeah. I mean, subscriptions, software subscriptions, you absolutely have to pay for. And even there, you should look at what are the essential systems that we have to have. I think there is sort of an opportunity around software solutions to do an inventory of what the organization is using and identify whether or not it's necessary. There's there's a separate issue related to that around data security and data privacy that there may not be a cost associated with that also should be addressed. But from a cost standpoint, I think one of the common examples is Adobe software, which is very expensive. And in good times, a lot of organizations will just buy a bunch of Adobe subscriptions for all their staff. And in leaner times, I think it's worth asking the question. Everybody needs email. That's obvious on the face of it. But does everybody need Adobe Creative Cloud? How many people in the organization really need that software? Are there subscriptions that for staff who are no longer with the organization? So there is an opportunity to go through and kind of inventory what the organization has and identify, do we need all that we're paying for right now, or can we reduce our spend in that area? In a similar way with laptops, for organizations that are reducing staff size, they may have a lot of laptops that were returned by their staff that they're no longer using. Those could end up, instead of renewing a warranty or purchasing new laptops, you could potentially, reshuffle the laptops that you have in such a way that, newer laptops that are on the bench could be distributed to staff whose laptops are past their usable life. So there are opportunities for consolidating and doing cost saving in when the organization is um, reducing its staff size or cutting back on its budget in other ways.
I think that is something that when we have new clients and we do our initial assessment for them, it's kind of shocking how many nonprofits may not have a current inventory of either their laptops or their licenses. And so that is often something that we can find savings for them of they don't have a good offboarding process even before these times. And so they may be paying for licenses for people who left, couple of years ago. And that's something that you should only be paying for the license that people are using.
Yeah, that's a great point, Carolyn. And I think, that's a good example of inventory management is a subset of IT management, and budgeting is a activity or a subset of IT management. All of these things kind of fall under the larger function of IT management that can be hard to keep up with, particularly the proactive parts of it. And that kind of gets back to the first question that you asked, do all MSPs help their customers with budgeting? I mean, a lot of MSPs probably help their customers with, the cost of solutions, providing them cost estimates. But in our view, budgeting is a much larger process that needs to be integrated into overall IT management, and not nearly as many MSPs provide IT management as part of their service.
Right, right. That makes sense. So I think you talked a little bit too about so that's one place you can find savings is in that inventory and licenses. And you talked before about looking at projects maybe and seeing if there are projects that you can put off, or maybe talk to your funders about, we want to move this server to the cloud. And, we've gotten an estimate that it's going to take, this much time of our staff to go through and figure out what the server is doing and how we're going to change that. And, talk to your funders about like when and how you could do something like that.
Yeah. I mean, I think, and this is going to sound fairly self-serving, but in my experience, most nonprofit organizations are already running a very tight ship and are investing just enough in IT. And so there's not a lot of, in our experience, there's not a lot of wiggle room to cut more without starting to have a negative impact on the ability of the organization to do its work.
Yeah. No, sorry, everyone.
Yeah.
It's hard. It means making some really critical decisions. And that's another reason why it rises to this level of budgeting. Your executive, your leadership team needs to be really looking at how do you make these decisions, because all of them are going to be painful. And maybe even you have a board member who is helping you with that strategic planning.
Yeah. And good management and good leadership is really the best investment you can make at any time, but particularly in times like these.
Yeah. Do you have any advice for talking with those stakeholders about IT budgets, like everyone from the staff who are going to be impacted to leadership to board members?
I think I think I'm going to sound like a broken record, but talking about IT in business terms is really important. I can't overemphasize that enough. It doesn't really help to talk about IT in technology terms. You always need to connect a technology solution to the business need that it's meeting. And if you can't, then it really calls into question whether that solution is necessary. If it doesn't tie to some business need you can speak to, then why do you have that solution in place?
Is it even a solution?
Is it, yeah, right. It's not solving any problems or addressing any needs that the organization has. So, um, and I think that it's always helpful to have that conversation. At whatever point IT is connecting to the organization, that's a good place to have that conversation. So if you're an IT manager at an organization and you report to the director of operations or the vice president of operations, then that's the most important conversation, because that's sort of the interface, if you will, between technology and the business needs of the organization. So that's the place to start having the conversation and identify, what business needs are being met by all of these technology solutions. And then you can expand that conversation out from there in a way that will make sense to key stakeholders throughout the organization.
That's great. And I really like the way you put it that, well, I guess it's sobering to think about the fact that so many nonprofits are already running such a lean organization and really don't have a lot of places they can cut without there being more pain points. But if you think about it, that's also an asset in this process. So we have nonprofits who are used to keeping an old car running for a long time.
Hmm.
And that is something that you bring to the table, is that ability to make those decisions. And I guess we would say, what I'm hearing you say is, make sure you're getting those security updates, that you're still operating a car that has brakes.
Hmm.
And when it gets to a point where it doesn't have brakes anymore, like you're going to need to upgrade.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think empathy needs to be a part of the process as well. Having worked with nonprofit organizations for over 25 years, I think the number one lesson I've learned is that almost every nonprofit is resource constrained. And to your point, you know, they're limited by the resources that they have. And I think that's just the reality of doing work in the nonprofit sector. And it's very challenging and difficult work at times, and it's made even more challenging and difficult because of the limited resources that nonprofits have to do this work. And so flexibility, empathy, resourcefulness, those are the qualities that I think the most successful nonprofits have in abundance. And it's valuable. Those things need to be a part of the budgeting process as well. The intangibles are also critical in order for nonprofits to survive and succeed, particularly in challenging times like now.
Well, I think that's a great place to leave it. Like, we know that our nonprofit sector can do hard things. So a budget is a hard thing, but it's probably not even the hardest thing that you're looking at. Thank you, Johan, for your time today. I think this was really helpful, hopefully, to people who are thinking about their budgets. I know a lot of nonprofits don't do budgets at year end anymore. It might be a process that you're going to start, in the first quarter or second quarter, but keep these things in mind as you are thinking about where you can pair.
Great. Thank you, Carolyn.
Thank you.
Community IT does these free webinars and podcasts for our community, and we love sharing our knowledge and experience. If you have more questions or are having trouble with your IT at your nonprofit, please get in touch with us on our website, www.communityit.com, so we can start a conversation or schedule an assessment. Downloading any of our free resources there will get you signed up for our webinar reminders, and you can attend our next webinar in real time and ask our experts your own questions. If you love podcasts, please subscribe and leave us a rating to help others find this leadership resource for nonprofits.